It had been a while since I was able to get back to that episode in question, mostly due to the fact that I had to work a few extra shifts back at the Walmart in order to pay my rent that month. And in turn, not only was I way too tired to watch the rest of the SpongeBob episode for at least a couple of weeks, but I was also too tired as well to try even do basic tasks. However, though, I did manage to get myself a few days off from the boss, who's honestly a really nice guy to say the least. So I was able to watch the rest of the episode without any interruptions. Now, before I actually get on with the rest of the episode, I think that it's in my best interest to discuss an important topic regarding the episode that most of you guys have commented on the blog recently. Many of you out there have been commenting about how the episode in question was not a very accurate representation of people with diabetes, given Patrick's situation and the like that he had gone through during the past few parts of the episode. To which I can answer and say that I agree wholeheartedly. Especially knowing that I have an uncle with diabetes who had taught me everything about it. The imbalances of the blood sugar content, the usage of various devices to try and monitor said blood sugar, the restricted diet that comes with it, and the potential fatal consequences that come with not being properly regulated. All those things that come into play with people with diabetes. Which I honestly can say is what made this episode a lot more disgusting in nature than what I guess it was supposed to be. I mean, what the fuck were the writers thinking when they decided to make something about a topic that they clearly had no knowledge of, or couldn't even bother to try and research for the sake of accuracy? I mean, I get it, it's a cartoon show, but dear God, guys, did this episode not only manage to make my blood boil a bit at the incompetence and stupidity most of the writers had? I mean, well then again though, many of the writers did create episodes for the adult party cartoon of Ren and Stimpy, so at least we know how much of a brain many of these writers tend to have in their heads. With that important topic out of the way, I can finally manage to finish describing this part of the episode, and you all know about how I said it would only get more fucked up as the episode inched on. Well, this part is definitely a more tamer one, but the next one's certainly not going to be as such. If anything, the last part itself was enough to make me want to smash my fist through the fucking screen. Once the scene with Patrick had finally passed, with Patrick finally passing away, after being in the diabetic coma for some time, the scene itself faded out a bit before fading in to show SpongeBob's pineapple house at night. The camera then zoomed into one of the porthole windows, which then cut to show the inside of SpongeBob's bedroom, with SpongeBob sitting on his bed, knees clutched over his face, crying hysterically. As he does this, the scene pans over towards SpongeBob's doorway, with Gary poking his head out of the doorway, looking rather sad, before meowing and slithering his way towards the sobbing sea sponge. Upon making his way towards the edge of the bed, Gary gave another meow, this time a bit louder, to which SpongeBob looked up with his tear-stained eyes and said, "Oh, hi, Gary," SpongeBob said, sniffling after each word. Gary let out another meow, this time softer, before crawling up SpongeBob's bed and near where his owner was at. SpongeBob held Gary close, and then proceeded to cry again. I miss him so much, Gary. I really do," SpongeBob cried. "Meow," Gary replied back. I didn't know that Patrick was sick. I should have done something else with him. It's my fault that he's gone, Gary. It's all my fault." SpongeBob then proceeded to break down into tears, to which Gary the Snail simply snuggled up with his owner, trying to calm him down in the process. "Meow, meow, meow," Gary said softly. "I know, Gary. I know it isn't my fault. Patrick would have gotten sick anyway, even if we didn't eat at Goofy Goober's, but still, I wish I had been a better friend and helped him out when I could have." "Meow, meow," Gary said once more, to which SpongeBob just sniffled, wiped the tears from his eyes, and then put on a soft smile. "You're right, Gary. Patrick wouldn't want me to be sad about him being gone. If anything, he'd want me to be happy. Happy about all the times we spent together, the friendship that we had, and the adventures we've gone on." With that, SpongeBob immediately hopped off the bed, a saddened look now completely wiped off of his face and replaced with a look of confidence and joy, the scene brightening up as it did, quite literally. Come on, Gary. Let's go to the Krusty Krab and get some lunch. My treat. SpongeBob called out to Gary, who in turn began to dart his way towards where SpongeBob was at. The next few scenes went on in a rather happy kind of manner. SpongeBob and Gary went to the Krusty Krab, where there was a temporary cashier of some sort, and proceeded to get a couple of Krabby Patties and eat them together while chit-chatting about what they wanted to do for the rest of the day. As they ate, the scene cut to show Mr. Krabs counting his money, as per usual, before his eyes darted towards the door, where the faint sound of SpongeBob and Gary's laughter could be heard in the background. "Well, I'll be," Mr. Krabs said as he made his way over towards the main dining area of the Krusty Krab. "Well, boyo," Mr. Krabs said happily as he made his way over towards the sponge, "I see that you're all smiles and whatnot." "Yep, Mr. Krabs. I'm feeling pretty better. I'm feeling a bit better about everything right now. I'm still pretty sad about Patrick being gone, but I know that Patrick wouldn't want me to be depressed about it, and he wants me to enjoy what I have in life, so that's what I'm doing today," SpongeBob said excitedly. "Well, I'm glad to hear that, boyo. It warms my heart to know that you're feeling better about the whole situation. And on top of that, having a more positive outlook on everything as well," Mr. Krabs said as he patted SpongeBob on the back. "So what are you up to today, Mr. Krabs?" SpongeBob asked. "Well, other than counting me money, nothing really much else. By the way, you haven't seen Squidward around, have you? He was supposed to come into work today, but didn't show up. Had to get the temporary cashier to come and take over his shift," Mr. Krabs asked. Now that you think about it, Mr. Krabs, I haven't seen him all day either. Although he's most likely still in his house doing whatever it is that he's doing," SpongeBob said. "Are you still angry at him, me boy, about what he said back there?" Mr. Krabs said. "Kinda, yes. I mean, it doesn't really bother me too much anymore, but if he were to at least apologize to what he said to Patrick, then I'd be willing to forgive him for what he did." "Well, that's good, me boyo. You two keep on having a good day today. I'll see you all at the funeral tomorrow," Mr. Krabs said, nearly hesitating at those last few words. "You too, Mr. Krabs, and I'll see you there as well," SpongeBob said. Oh, okay, boyo. Oh, and one more thing. If you ever need to talk, you got my number, don't you?" Mr. Krabs asked. SpongeBob simply nodded, and Mr. Krabs nodded and then made his way back into his office. SpongeBob and Gary proceed to then finish up their meal. Upon completion, the bubble splash screen comes up, showing SpongeBob knocking on Sandy's door with a water helmet for both him and Gary. Sandy immediately opens up the door and then proceeds to greet SpongeBob while inviting him into her tree dome. "Hi there, SpongeBob," the Texan squirrel said as she handed SpongeBob a teacup with a lemon wedge on it. "Thanks, Sandy," SpongeBob said, taking the cup in his hands. "I see that you're doing fine. Must have managed to get all that sadness out of you, didn't you?" Sandy asked. "Yep, thanks to Gary over there," SpongeBob said as he pointed over to Gary, who simply burped and ate a cookie that Sandy had given him. "Glad to hear, SpongeBob. So, what do you feel like doing today?" Sandy asked. "How about a little KRT?" SpongeBob said with a slightly sassy tone. "Oh, you're on, SpongeBob," Sandy exclaimed as she put on her karate gear as quickly as possible. For the next few minutes, it simply showed both Sandy and SpongeBob having a relatively fun game of karate together. Very similar to the episodes in Season 1 to 3, which was a nice bit of fresh air in my opinion. Well, to kinda cut down on any unnecessary details regarding the episode, I'm simply just gonna cut to the rest of the funeral part. For the second time of the episode, the bubble flash screen comes up, this time taking place in the middle of the evening. The sky is a mixture of various beautifully painted swirls, followed by the evening sun glistening down over the church, which, for anybody wondering, was the same one for choir boys. The dark tone of the funeral bell rang out throughout the scene, before slowly fading out into a quiet ring as the scene cut to show the inside of the church. Shockingly enough, there weren't really that many Bikini Bottomites in the pews. Actually, it only seemed as though SpongeBob, Mr. Krabs, Sandy, Gary, Plankton, Pearl, Karen, and hell, even Mermaid and Barnacle Boy were the only ones present. Well, that and the main presider, a priest, kinda, and the organ woman, the old lady from Have You Seen the Snail, was there. The closed casket, also containing Patrick's body, was adorned with various colored coral, instead of flowers, as is usually done per funeral, with candles all around it. The sight was honestly rather beautiful, especially for a SpongeBob episode like this one. Then, as the toll bell finally had ended, the priest character made his way up to the podium and altar, and began reciting the usual cartoony dialect that usually is used in cartoon funerals. Then, the podium was opened up to anyone who wanted to come up and say anything that they felt like saying for the deceased. Then, SpongeBob was the first one to go up to the podium, and as he walked up, everybody looked up at him, not really saying much or doing much, just simply watching him as he continued on walking up there. And then, once he had finally made his way there, he simply coughed a little bit to try and clear his throat, and then finally said, "Well, I'm usually not the ones who, does these kind of things, but here I go." SpongeBob took in a deep breath before finally beginning his speech. "Me and Patrick have been good friends since the very beginning of our lives. In fact, I even remember the day that me and Patrick went jellyfishing for the first time ever. I managed to catch my first jellyfish that day, and Patrick, well, he got stung. A lot," SpongeBob said, giggling a bit, which made a few of the others in the church chuckle as well. "I also remember the day that he helped me get my job at the Krusty Krab. If it wasn't for him giving me that much-needed pep talk that I needed, then, honestly, who knows where I'd be. Probably stuck in that bubble town that I was at. But still, he was my best friend in the whole wide world. No matter what happened between the two of us, fights, disagreements, and even, well, other things, he was always and always will be my best friend in the whole wide world. And nothing will ever change that." At this point, SpongeBob began to cry, as memories continued to flash on the screen of past episodes showing Patrick and SpongeBob doing various things together, including a couple of rather heartwarming and tear-jerking moments as well from the show that seemed to only further increase SpongeBob's need to cry. I'm gonna miss him so much. So much." SpongeBob then simply lowered his head into the podium and proceeded to start sobbing again, to which Sandy and Mr. Krabs immediately went up slowly towards the sponge and patted him on the back, trying to comfort him in a rather warm fashion. Everybody else seemed to look on with the same sad faces. A few of them, including Karen, even started to cry themselves. I myself, however, was just looking on, really upset and rather distraught about what was going on with this episode, but at the same time, kind of somewhat relieved at that period of time, seeing as how this, while it was a sad and depressing moment, at least it wasn't going into anything particularly screwed up. At least, not yet. After a few moments of crying, SpongeBob then proceeded to raise his now reddened eyes and began smiling, before turning around to the coffin where Patrick was at, and then saying, "Thank you, Patrick. Thank you for being the best friend a sponge could ever have. You were everything to me, and you will always be that. You're my #1 best friend in the whole world, and I love you, Patrick. Always have, and always will." And with that, SpongeBob proceeded to slowly walk back down the stage and sat back in the front pew, with Mr. Krabs and Sandy following behind him and sitting right next to him, comforting him in the process. The priest then proceeded to get up from the chair that he was sitting on, and then asked anyone else if they wanted to come up to the stage to say some words. However, before anybody else could say anything, a loud bang was heard coming from the front doors. In fact, the bang itself was so loud that it caused even me to jump. As if in a sense, in a form of, well, dramatic effect, everyone turned towards the door and gasped. The scene then panned out quickly to reveal Squidward standing next to the doorway, his face disheveled, and his entire body dressed in a nice suit and tie. Then, Slowly but surely he began making his way down the aisle of the church, with everyone just staring at him with a mix between shocked faces, which was a majority of the people that were in that church, and a few upset and rather angry ones, mostly coming from Mr. Krabs and Sandy. Upon reaching Patrick's casket, he closed his eyes and then said softly, "I have a few things I'd like to say about Patrick." The priest fish then looked around for any kind of objections, to which he finds none, and allows Squidward to come up to the pulpit. As the cephalopod makes his way towards it, he puts on a pair of reading glasses and then places a few sheets of paper, to which he had apparently written something on, maybe a eulogy or something, I didn't even know. Then, he looked up at the small crowd of people, who look as though they're about to hear something particularly bad out of Squidward's mouth, as many of them were not exactly too unknown or ignorant about Patrick's past with Squidward. Sandy and Mr. Krabs just, however, were the only two that gave Squidward a deep, hate-filled death glare. No doubt stemming from not only what he had said earlier in the episode at the hospital, but also, like I said before, the previous engagement that Squidward and Patrick had had in the past, and definitely not wanting to sit there and hear what Squidward was going to have to say. Sandy herself even wound up standing up to go and try and stop Squidward, but Mr. Krabs stopped her, just simply saying, if he says anything wrong at all, you and I will go and grab him and take him out of here. I promise you that. But until he does that, we have no right sitting there and taking him out, unless that's what Spongebob wants. Do you want that, my boy?" Spongebob simply just lowered his head down, all the way down to his knees, and said, "No. Let him talk." "I'm ready," Spongebob said. Mr. Krabs then patted him there, and then went back to glaring back at Squidward. Squidward himself just stares out at everybody for a few more seconds, and then stares back at Spongebob, seeing the forlorn sponge not even look up to meet his gaze. Squidward simply takes a deep breath and begins reading. "Before I start my speech, I have something that I want to confess to all of you here. Before Patrick passed away, I was there at the hospital when I had heard the news about what had happened to him. And once there, instead of being kind and honestly at least keeping my mouth shut, I began to ruthlessly start to celebrate the upcoming passing of Patrick Star, in front of Spongebob and the others, no doubt. Why I did this was because I thought that he was finally getting what he deserved for all the torment that he had caused me over the years." Once Squidward had finished that statement, the rest of the Bikini Bottomites began to proceed to boo at Squidward, a few of them even making a few snide jeers at him as well. Squidward doesn't say or do anything. He simply just lowers his head and takes all of it, as if he knows that's what he deserved. This went on for at least a couple of more minutes before the priest proceeded to hold up his hands and stop everyone from saying and doing what they were doing, before scolding everybody by saying, "People, this is a funeral. I understand that you do not like what Squidward has to say here, but maybe there's something more to it that you are not willing to listen to. I greatly recommend that you please calm down, or else I'll have to clear you all out. I don't want to have to do that, especially knowing that this friend of yours was a very close one. But if I have to, so help me, I will. Now please, calm yourselves down at once and allow him to speak now." Everyone, hesitantly, proceeded to do exactly what the priest had ordered them to do. They all immediately sat back down, but continued to glare at Squidward, as well as with Mr. Krabs and Sandy. Squidward simply took one more final breath and then said, "I deserve that. Not gonna lie. In fact, I probably deserved worse for the horrible things that I not only said to Patrick before his death, but also to what I've said and done to him even before all of that. All the times I've assaulted him, attacked him, screamed at him, and the like. It didn't honestly do anything. In fact, it didn't help me or him. It did nothing more than fuel my rage as much as it did. While I certainly can't condone everything that Patrick's done to me, I will admit that I should have at least taken a different approach that may have helped Patrick understand what he was doing was wrong. But of course, my rage continuously took over my rational thinking. And now, I'm only starting to see the error of my ways now that Patrick is finally gone. Tears started to stream down Squidward's eyes, a few of them even dripping onto the paper in the process. He wipes them away before continuing on with his speech. I want to say, Spongebob, that I'm sorry. Sorry for what I've done to him. But not just to what I've done or said to him, but what I've done to you. I understand if you still hate my guts because of what I've said and done, and I don't blame you, not at all. If anything, if you want to just pound me into dust after the funeral, then I'd be okay with it. I won't press charges, and I sure as heck won't sit there and stop you. But even afterwards, if you can ever find it in your heart to forgive me for what I've done, it would mean the world to me. SpongeBob immediately looked up, his eyes glistening with tears, but a small smile starting to form on his face. But that only continued to grow more, as Squidward then proceeded to turn to the coffin, as SpongeBob had done in the beginning, and then proceed to say, Patrick, if you're listening, I hope you can forgive me as well. I'm sorry, Patrick, for everything. And I hope that wherever you are, you're at peace. Squidward then wiped the rest of the tears off of his face, and then proceeded to take the pages off of the pulpit, fold them up, and put it into a side of his suit pocket. He then proceeded to step down from the altar itself, and then begin to make his way down the aisle of the church. However, just before he's about to get to the doorway and open it up and leave, he's instantly met with a sudden jolt, and a voice saying, Squidward, wait, coming from SpongeBob. The camera immediately panned over to where SpongeBob was at, to which SpongeBob was just looking at him with the biggest smile on his face. SpongeBob, I'm truly sorry. I'm gonna leave now. You won't have to worry about seeing me after this. I'll go now. Squidward then reached over to the door, but SpongeBob immediately grabbed him, taking him completely off guard, and then proceeded to give him the biggest hug he could give him, while tears streamed down SpongeBob's eyes in the process. I accept your apology, Squidward, and I honestly hope you can forgive me as well for what I've said. I didn't mean to yell at you back there, I was just angry. You're a good friend, and I'm sorry as well for whatever problems I caused you as well. I'm so sorry. Squidward accepts this, and proceeds to give SpongeBob a hug back as well. I forgive you, SpongeBob. I forgive you, and I hope Patrick can forgive me as well. And after this, everyone then proceeds to start applauding, and SpongeBob then leads Squidward back over to where Sandy and Mr. Krabs were, who look to have a rather satisfied expression. Sandy then proceeds to nudge Squidward a little bit and said, I'm proud of you, Squidward. I really am. You managed to swallow up your pride, and you did what was right. You did a good job there. Yeah, Squidward, me boy. You did a good job. I was gonna fire you after this, but you convinced me otherwise. In fact, I'm even willing to remove that probation I'd give you. You did a good job, Squidward. I'm proud of you. And once that had ended, the funeral continued on as before, each and everyone giving their final words about Patrick Star, which really wasn't much else to say, although to kind of more or less put it down a bit, basically it kind of went on with Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy talking about how Patrick was was basically a really good, includement of of SpongeBob and everything. And the others basically talking about, well, minor things, about the good things about Patrick and what he's done for them. And with that, the priest concluded the service, and the pallbearers proceeded to pick up the coffin and make its way towards where the main graveyard was, which was right next to the church, if anybody was wondering. Everybody else followed. It was, like in every kind of funeral, gloomy. But at the same time, though, the full moon itself managed to provide enough light for everybody to know where they were going. And then, once they finally got to the grave with Patrick's headstone on it, which was shaped in the same form as Patrick, I might add, the priest proceeded to give his final blessing, quote unquote, at least one for a kid show that would be allowed without there being problems and censors. And then after that, the coffin was slowly lowered into the ground. Everyone, including SpongeBob, took a handful of dirt and proceeded to put it on top of there. And then after that, the service finally concluded with everybody else, with a few other people sitting there and filling in the rest of the hole with the dirt, followed by everybody else leaving and making their way back home.
In fear and surprise, as your eyes widen, your mouth goes dry with each battered breath. You try to scream, your mind begs to leave, glued to your computer screen. The killers they slash, the tapes burn and crash. The cartridge you bought will be your final haunt. The rituals of hate will seal your fate. The tears you shed will be from the fear-gripping, horror-driven, nightmarish, gore-filled, terrorizing, hateful, burning, violent, rage-inducing, knife-slashing, blood-splattering, silent screams. Only time will tell if you will escape this online hell. Your horror-filled obsessions will come with its own regressions. Your pathetic screams will not be heeded in any way, because your nightmares will come at any day.